What's up, guys? This is going to be another cubing ramble, cubing golden tidbit, cubing shower thought, whatever you want to call it. It's one of these. This one's going to be less useful for like lower level solvers in terms of direct application and like direct improvement. But I think for like everyone into cubing, it's a definitely worthwhile idea to think about. And for like top level solvers, I hope they can get something out of it at least. But yeah, on like a practical level, this is definitely a bit of a more advanced idea. So basically this is to do with like every extension of CFOP, from like the easy ones like COLL and winter variation to the more advanced ones like ZBLL, VLS and ZBLS. So with all these subsets, depending on your level of knowledge, they may or may not be worth it. And what I mean by that is, let's take COLL for example. If you don't know anything other than the EPLLs, you've just refused to learn T-perm, Y-perm and stuff like that, then COLL becomes very useful. I'm obviously like half joking, but I'm just like trying to make the point. But if you do know full PLL, then you know, some cases, usually the SOONs for COLL don't become worth it just because you can do OLL and PLL faster, because the disparity between EPLL and non-EPLL PLLs is not as big as people think. And some other cases can also be not worth it with COLL rather. For example, like diag swap T that is, it's usually better to do the 9-move IUD algorithm or the fat 8-mover if you're into that. And then with something like winter variation, some of the cases that just take a lot of moves and are really tricky to recognize because of 3 corners, they tend to not be worth it because winter variation is relatively rare, and if you don't use a lot of other VLS or other OLL skip techniques, you're not really going to be filtering for that as much, so recognition becomes more of a problem than it would be if you say used VLS or a lot more just OLL skipping or last slot look ahead in general, which usually isn't worth it for people who just do basic bitch OLL and PLL. But then beyond that, it actually gets really interesting once you get to a certain point. And so my example is so for someone like me, since I know most of ZBLL, I don't know the SOONs and anti-SOONs, but I know the rest of ZBLL. I also know all of VLS, and mainly because of the ZBLL thing, you know, there are things to mention about VLS and to a lesser extent ZBLS. The point is, because I know so much ZBLL, there are some OLL cases that legitimately stop becoming worth it, for the same reason that some COLL cases won't be worth it based on your like level of knowledge. So it's a pretty ridiculous idea, but I will explain it and hopefully like make it clear why, for someone who knows a lot of ZBLL, some OLL cases might actually not be as worthwhile as you think. So at this point, I'm going to switch the camera over to cube view. Let's just jump and flip this over. And lower. Alright, that's pretty good. Okay, so this crazy idea of OLL not being worth it. Let's get some examples going. So, first one that I think everyone is very, very familiar with by this point. This OLL, it's called the FAS OLL because FAS has very famously done Frueroff into ZBLL in, I believe, at least 3 of his world record averages, if not more. He did it in his like first sub 7, he did it in the one just before that, and he also did it in the one after, which he got in Poland with like 6.4 average. So yeah, this one, the normal OLL algs include like that, double inverse, like that, or you could do it from the back, which I think most people would prefer. You can also do the one where it's like Frueroff cancelled into that. But what Faz and I tend to do for this, probably not for this specific CP because you'd get a diag T, which can be a bit hit or miss. But let's say, I don't know, we'll do a T-perm and twist some corners. Say it's something like this. Here, instead of doing like longish OLL into, you know, just like a 1-second PLL, I could do Frueroff. And because I know ZB and because I'm very comfortable with my algs, a lot of the ZBLL algs, especially for things like TU and L, are like no slower than like 1.5. So when you take into account how much time you save with doing Frueroff versus like a borderline sup 1 OLL, and you also take into account that the recognition for T is pretty good, it actually as you can see, like it looks like it's probably faster than a lot of OLL and PLL combos there. So that's just like the most famous example, but it actually does go beyond this in my opinion. This is another case I picked up from Mikhail Pleskovic. We'll just set it up like this. Obviously if I do the normal OLL alg it'll skip, and if I see this I'll tend to do it this way. But suppose we have, trying to think of the best way to muck around, I don't know. Well, we'll just pretend we have something else. Basically like doing this into either a rotation like that, or what some people will like to do is this, which is also okay. Another one I've seen is where you like do U2 and then you do Fruoff, and then you cancel into like the standard L thing like that. So there's two ways of doing this, and I kind of switch between both. One is just doing Fruoff into L, which I like because there are L cases that are... I mean, like the vast majority of L cases, if not all of L, is just like flat out good. There's like a few diagonal swap cases which are but beyond that, it's a very good set in my opinion. The way Mikhail Pleskovic tackles this is by doing sexy M prime undo, which is another very fast alg, not quite as fast as... Oh, actually, it might be as fast as Fruoff because it's more moves, but there's like no like, you know, FRU regrip, which is obviously minor, but does matter. And yeah, because he does like, because the algorithm is just a 3 cycle of edges, it becomes very easy to track ZVLL, because these corners won't change, and then this edge here won't change, which gives you information. You could do it from a U2 angle as well, but I just think it gives you less info from there. So I'll switch between these two. For something like this, I would either do the standard OLL, or I would just do the Mikhail way and then do the ZB that I get, usually with enhanced recognition. If, for example, let's say I have, how do I want to set this up? We'll just do a pure, why not? Say I have something like this. So for this CP, I would want to do sexy, and because I can just see the edges, like I see this will come here, I know this will be opposite, so I can just go straight into my ZB. Obviously, this is pretty advanced stuff. Like, you not only have to know ZB, you have to be like pretty damn comfortable with it. But a counter example for that OLL. This will be the last example before I move on to some other examples. How do I want to do this? Just like that. So again, like I said before, the Diag T ZBs are a bit hit or miss for me. Some of them just don't have great algs. So here I would just do Fruoff and then take the 2GLL, which in this case is very, very nice. The last example that I can think of like an OLL that's definitely not always worth it, at least for me. I think there are more for me to discover, but I just have to take the time, which I don't really tend to do, because I'm just not cubing as much as I used to. But another example, so there's this OLL. It's similar to the Faz OLL. It's H, corners, and a line, but instead of being like this, it's, you know, just 3 lines like so. There are a few algs for this OLL. There's the classic. I think it's pretty good, especially for the OLL CP. I would continue doing that. There's the Colin Burns, which is, so there's this one. This does no swap. This one's kind of long, like, significantly longer than Fruoff and Sexy Sledge, which I'll get to in a sec. And then the Diag OLL CP is just... I don't know if this is the standard OLL CP, this is just the alg I know. It's a good one class layer at least. Pretty trash. And then there's, I did not do this alg right. Whatever. Idea. How do I want to set this up? I don't know. We could do this. No, we can't. Wrong angle. Okay, so yeah, and then this is the last OLCP. This one has like an okay alg, but it's still kind of long. So an idea, and I haven't actually implemented this one into my solves yet, but I am seriously considering it for the line OLL. You can either do Fruoff, like for that CP, and then get 2GLL. Or if you have... That's not going to set up the one I want. If we have this one here, I might get the angle wrong. Yeah, okay, I got it right. You can just do Sexy Sledge into 2GLL with the L set. Or you could just do Fruoff into like a random pi, but these ones are like pretty hit or miss. This one's easy to recognize because of this and that, but some of them get really, really annoying. And some of the AUX videos aren't great either, just by the by. So yeah, if you have like this OLCP, you just do Sexy Sledge, guarantee 2 GLL. Not a great case, but just an example. So that's like 3 OLLs where, depending on the situation, or like in most situations, the OLL is not going to be faster than an alternate EO ALG into ZBLL. And it's just an interesting idea, I think, to consider when you're at a higher level. Another one I want to mention really quick before I end the video is like with VLS. A lot of people ask me how I like balance ZBLL and VLS. Basically for me, like pretty much all of the Sledge VLS cases, so like, well, not like specifically this one, but let's say I have this. It's not really worth it for me to do that into an OLL skip when I can just do this into a ZB. So I don't use really any of the Sledge cases unless I catch the 3 easy ones, so like that one, Sledge, which I mean I'll just do by default. Or if I catch this, I'll try to do that. But even if I miss it, I still usually get a good last layer anyways. So those VLSs become not worth it for me personally, even though for solvers who don't know ZBLL, I would highly recommend learning those. So it's just it's interesting how things stop being worth it once you learn certain things, or certain extensions of CFOP. As for winter variation, I use like about half of them. Basically any winter variation that easily goes into a soon, I'll either cancel or just predict the soon and do like the smart thing. But the ones that like easily go into like L, T, and U, I'll pretty much always just opt for that. And then when it like usually goes into like pi or H, it becomes kind of tricky. Usually for those ones I can just force a better ZBLL with like UT or L. So yeah, that's where like ZBLS, or ZBLL rather, and VLS become... What am I saying? VLS and winter variation, they become less worthwhile for me for some subsets, but for others like VLS is still the bomb. Another interesting... I'm just reading through my notes right now, my brain's all over the place at the moment. I'll give like a basic example and then I'll give like a non-basic example and just end the video. Another one is like with OLLCP. I don't think this is a common problem anymore, but there definitely used to be some people that would learn like ridiculous OLLCPs like for this, when you have FreeRough, but no swap. Instead of getting a diag swap, people would like do ALGs like that. This isn't necessarily an advanced like idea because it's not predicated on having an ALG set like ZBLL make things not worthwhile. But if you're doing crap like that, this is probably going to be more useful for the lower level people still watching. Just don't do stuff like that. The disparity between like all PLLs is not as big as you think. Like I can do Y perms as fast as Z perm, you know? And I could give other examples, but basically like all of your PLLs should be like around a similar time frame with like very few, if any, outliers. Maybe with like the N perm, F perm, V perm. But yeah, you don't really need to go to ridiculous lengths and do stuff like that for OLCP. Another one is with ZBLS, even like the really easy ZBLSs. So say something like this, we'll just twist the corners so we don't get a LL skip. Sometimes people will criticize like high-level solvers for doing something like this for the last pair, which, I mean, yes, you can get a free EO, and I mean, getting yourself closer to solved is pretty much always a good thing, especially when it's that easy. But if you don't know very many ZBLLs, or like even like all the good CLLs, even if you do know all of the good CLLs, it's not necessarily that worthwhile for you to get an EO. In my opinion, like getting EO and CFOP isn't really something you want to prioritize until you're like doing ZB like a decent amount. Like I'd say you know at least like a quarter of it or something. Otherwise, like EO just like, it really doesn't mean a whole lot. Like avoiding dots is one thing, but like forcing all 4 edges, even when it's easy, like I feel like you should do it, but it's not the worst thing if you don't. And if you have to like go really far out of your way, like let's say something like this, like to get full EO for this, you would have to do that and then back sledge, which is awkward. And if you don't know like this, like even though I know the specific ZBLL, it's really not worth it for me to do that like weird last lot trick when I could just force a VLS in the front, or just like do my pair and do OLL PLL. But when you know a bit more ZBLL, you can sort of weigh the risk reward, or not risk reward, but like how like good learning a certain ZBLS is in terms of, you know, how worthwhile it is for what you know. So for someone like me, since I know a lot of ZBLL, I have to start considering more and more ZBLS options. Basically, my rule of thumb is that if I can do the ZBLS at a similar speed to the normal last slot alg, I will heavily consider it, if not just outright implement it, and then if it's like a little bit slower, I'm a lot less likely to, and if it's much slower, then like it's just out the window. So, and you can apply similar logic to things like OLLCP relative to your like EPLL to non-EPLL PLL disparity. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for this video. Once you go down the rabbit hole of like going beyond just basic bitch CFOP, things get pretty interesting. That's pretty much the premise of this video. You go down that rabbit hole, and goddamn does shit get interesting. Thank you for watching.